The delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first want to afford the opportunity for anybody in this space who has experienced primary or secondary trauma due to sexual assault or rape to make a decision as to whether or not you want to stay in this space or turn down your volume on your computer for my Women's History speech. Racy Taylor, a 24-year-old African-American sharecropper, was walking home from church with her friend and her friend's teenage son in Alabama in 1944 when 6 men, Hugo Wilson, Herbert Lovett, Luther Lee, Joe Culpepper, Dillard York, Billy Howerton, and Robert Gamble, and I say their names because I want them to have credit for what it was that they did, forced Racy into a car at gunpoint and drove her to a grove of pine trees on the side of the road where they forced her to disrobe. And she begged them, citing, "I have a husband and a 3-year-old. But Hubert Lubbert, who was unmoved by this, ordered her to just act like you do with your husband, or I will cut your damn throat. He and 5 other men raped her. The 7th man, Billy Howerton, he later said, "I didn't take part because I knew Racy." Racy survived that moment. And although it was very dangerous for African Americans to speak out against white people during the Jim Crow era, Racy refused to remain silent about her sexual violence. She bravely reported the attack to the police, and the next day, her house was set on fire. Racy survived. The crime was extensively covered by the Black press and an early catalyst for the civil rights movement. The NAACP actually sent a young activist from Montgomery, Alabama chapter, Rosa Parks, to investigate. And even though Racy reported the crime, witnesses corroborated her story. One of the men actually confessed. The men were not brought to custody. As a matter of fact, in 1944, an all-white, all-male grand jury heard Racy's case, and after 5 minutes of deliberation, they dismissed it. The governor took it a step further and sent investigators, and a second grand jury was held in 1945. And by that time, 3 more of the men had confessed to raping Racy, but none of them were prosecuted. And although the Racy Taylor's case did not succeed in the short term, her bravery helped mobilize communities and build coalitions that would become pillars of the civil rights movement. Now, decades passed before her case actually gained some more traction when a publication in 2010 by historian Danielle L. McGuire, a white woman, brought it to light. The book prompted an official apology in 2011 to Racy by the Alabama state legislature, which called the failure to prosecute her attackers morally aberrant and repugnant. And that's where my brain kind of unbreaks a little bit. For years, I sat with my trauma thinking that I used it for good, but never got to see justice. I held in my hands and my heart that a police officer looked me in my eyes and said, there is no way that they could convict my first attacker because it was his word against mine. And when I found two European American young ladies whose stories predated and mirrored mine with that same attackers, the police department found a way to get a conviction. And a year and a half later, while on active duty serving this great nation, I saw the same thing, my second attacker. No consequences for assaulting me. But when I found another young woman who went through the same thing, who was European American, whose rape also predated mine, she found justice. Again, someone else getting justice from my trauma. Ladies, we cannot untether our past from our future, but it's paramount that we move together. This I've learned. I believe that there is justice, and just not justice for the identities that I hold as sometimes as a woman and as American of African descent. You know, these two identities, we're constantly exchanging our trauma for change, just like Racy, because she held hers for 70 years after it happened. My hope is that at some point, our lived experiences and trauma will become a valid reason for equity and for justice. And so as a first-generation post-Jim Crow person, a first-generation post-Civil Rights Act, first generation post Title IX, and a woman who literally has been assaulted to success, I tip my hat to Racy Taylor. I salute the women of Tailhook, Scaniel, because we will continue to be innovative and creative using the tools that are available to us even when a legal system continuously fails us. Because of Racy's reporting, her revolutionary rape, this did not happen in vain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.